Helen-Ann, it is exciting to have you on our show. You are, of course, our Asia correspondent based in Beijing. Goodness, you must be busy at the moment.
It's been incredibly busy, a little tiring, but do you know what? I have been absolutely gunning to get myself on this podcast since you guys started making it. So I've achieved it. I've done it. I'll chalk that up as a win.
I'm sure it won't be the last time, given everything that's going on with the US and China at the moment.
I'm Mark Stone.
I'm Martha Kelner.
And I'm Helen-Ann Smith.
This is day 81 of Trump 100 and a huge U-turn from President Trump on his sweeping tariffs. People were getting a bit yippy, he said, and so he's instituted a 90-day pause on most tariffs, apart from China.
Yes, the trade war between the two biggest economies in the world escalated even further, if that was possible. A 125% tariff now for the Chinese.
And I've been in eastern China in a place called Yiwu. It's the site of the world's biggest wholesale market, and I've been gauging reaction there.
Another day and another astonishing development in this tariffs tale. I'm in Las Vegas, incidentally, about to start my holiday. I think Donald Trump would characterise his tariffs game as a hand of poker, but to an outsider, it feels potentially like it's been a game of craps after a few whiskies at 3 a.m. Certainly different messages coming out of the administration about what's prompted this sudden change of tact and the timing of it, but certainly a sigh of relief for markets, financial markets around the world, which are suddenly bouncing back today.
Yes, we're all trying to digest what these global tariffs might mean in practice for importers, for exporters around the world, and then boom, a 90-day pause. Relief, definitely. Confusion, for sure. And what next? Well, who knows? Helen-Ann, you've only just woken up to this news. It's 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. as we record this. How are you taking it in?
Yeah, I think there's been a sense of, oh, wow, it just keeps coming, doesn't it? I feel like every morning I wake up, there is something quite alarming at the top of my newsfeed. And while it's some relief for countries like the UK and certainly for smaller economies, the ones that were going to be really crippled by all this, for China, it's a really different story.
Yeah, it really is. We'll get on to the implications in detail for China in a moment. But let's just run through what has for sure been a whirlwind day. It was all happening on Trump's Truth Social account. He started off this morning by saying, "Be cool," obviously all in capitals. And then a little later, all in caps, "A good time to buy."
Well, I thought that people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, you know? They were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid, unlike these champions. Because we have a big job to do. No other president would have done what I did.
He said people, the markets, were getting yippy and feeling queasy, which is perhaps the understatement of the century, isn't it? It's difficult not to come to the conclusion, I think, that first the Donald moved the markets and then the markets moved the Donald.
And on that, our colleague Ian King has written a really interesting article, very complicated. I had to read it a few times, but I eventually understood it. On all of that, on the bond markets, we've linked it in the show notes, and it's on the Sky News app and the web, of course, as well. And make no mistake, Ian says, Trump blinked. You do have to wonder, though, who picked up on Trump's post this morning. "Good time to buy," he said. I wonder who did just that, bought stocks, how much money did they make over the course of the day? Some might say, in fact, some are saying, it stinks.
Yeah, some people have been making an awful lot of money over the past 4 days, I'm sure. Not me, sadly.
You're in Las Vegas, though. You might.
I need to try my lucks on the slots instead, I think. Perhaps Donkey Derby. The Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, came outside the White House to explain the move to the press. And he painted it all as a negotiation, that this was all part of one big plan.
This was his strategy all along, and we are willing to cooperate with our allies and with our trading partners who did not retaliate. It wasn't a hard message. Don't retaliate.
So I guess the question from that is, was this the art of the deal, or is Trump the chaos creator in chief? I don't know what you make of it all, Helen-Ann, from over there.
Well, it might help him making deals with smaller countries, but I think Trump said yesterday that he was confident he'd make a deal with China. And I think that confidence that these type of tactics will bring a country like China to the table is based on a pretty deep misunderstanding of the Chinese system and what fundamentally drives it. Like, remember, this is a system that really doesn't like to lose face. That's incredibly important to it. And there's actually a genuine belief behind all this at the very top levels of the Chinese system that the US's ultimate goal here is actually to actively restrain China, to undermine it, to cripple its growth. And so when you take that set of beliefs in context, capitulation to Trump, it just doesn't serve any purpose. They don't believe it will deter the Americans from what they think they're after. And it's essentially just not an option. Remember also, Xi Jinping's got his reputation as Asia's strong man to defend as well. But it is the case, I think, that there are scores of other countries, smaller economies, that are queuing up to negotiate. I think I saw a tweet from Trump's top aide, Stephen Miller, calling this a master strategy.
Yeah, but the thing is, was it? Because certainly there are many across the country, Trump supporters, who will believe that this was quite that, the art of the deal, Trump doing what he does best. But what was interesting is that in the Oval Office a little later on in the day, when he did face quite a few questions from a select group of some of them quite compliant journalists, he did seem to suggest that he had a change of tune, that maybe it was in the last couple of days, maybe it was this morning, that he'd come to a decision to change his tune. So that would suggest it's not part of a master plan.
Our own James Matthews was running around the White House trying to get some answers from Trump's top trade envoy, Peter Navarro. He wasn't for talking.
Hi, Mr. Navarro. James Matthews from Sky News. Sir, you said that tariffs were non-negotiable. Why did you say that?
Sir, we got to get to work. I apologize.
Did you contribute to the chaos in the market, sir?
Nice to hear James asking the questions that matter there. I wonder as well how much damage what Donald Trump's done over the past couple of weeks has done to the trading relationships between America and Europe, because I imagine if you're a European business, your trust in the American economy and American business leaders is at an all-time low at the moment.
Yeah.
And you imagine Europe will be looking at the opportunities to build trade deals with China now rather than with the US.
This is the perfect segue to get into China, to talk to you specifically about that. What are they making of all this?
I think the Chinese are furious and sort of insulted as well to a degree. I don't think it's an overestimation to say that they would be taking this quite personally, actually. They really are the country that has been singled out above all others. But I think also if you take a step back, just the sheer enormity of the fact that the world's two biggest economies have sort of essentially, as of this week, ceased to trade with each other. I just don't think that's really quite sunk in yet. Yeah, I don't think it's quite sunk in yet, because I think we can get quite caught up in the weeds and the numbers. I know it's 10% here and then it's 34% and then it's 50%. But when you take a step back and you add it all up, we are talking about tariffs between the two now that are so high that it essentially makes all trade impossible. And in a place here in China where a fifth of the economy is in its exports, it is just brutal for the ordinary people behind all this.
I mean, I remember what Biden always used to say, that he wanted competition with China, not conflict. The danger, obviously, with two superpowers is that one can lead to the other. Unintended consequences, such a huge, huge risk. And also, imagine if Donald Trump was to apply this sort of hip-shooting brinkmanship, whether you call it a masterstroke or not. Imagine if he was to apply that to a geopolitical disagreement, not an economic one. I mean, it's something to consider for sure. Trump said a little earlier that he does think a deal can be done with China, but he said that they're just not quite sure how to go about it. The Chinese don't really know how they can make a deal. What do you reckon?
Well, look, I think it's not totally impossible that a deal could be done, but let's be clear. Any deal with China has got to be done in a way that suits the Chinese. They will not accept a deal that doesn't look good for them. And a deal in those terms might not be palatable to Trump. So, we're trying to match two pretty opposing sides. Look, I think the Chinese will definitely continue to respond, but they're also working quite hard to try and position themselves as the stable entity within all this. And there's a lot of political gain for China around that, particularly in the global south, really contrasting themselves to Trump's instability. I think it's worth saying, though, it might sound totally crazy in a world where we're talking about 84% tariffs, but actually China's most recent responses could actually be interpreted as relatively restrained, perhaps designed to avoid escalation at least, because what they've done in their retaliations is they've matched Trump tariff for tariff. What they've not done is go over and above what he's inflicted on them. And crucially as well, they've chosen to avoid some of the more political, some of the more cultural measures that they absolutely could have taken, but would have been seen as much more provocative. And I think if we want to see a silver lining in all this, that might be an indication that they are at the very least trying to avoid escalation. Look, perhaps further spiraling is something China does want to avoid, but it could also just be leaving some options on the table for later.
Just on a very micro scale, and I just took a walk around the Las Vegas Strip, and obviously there are huge, big businesses here, but there are also small businesses. There's a souvenir shop here, which gets 90 to 95% of the products it uses to make souvenirs, Las Vegas souvenirs, from China, which is interesting in itself. Now, what do they do? Do they suddenly look for new trading relationships with other countries? So this is going to be something that will be worked out by small business owners in the coming days and weeks.
But the mad thing is that Donald Trump's view is that all that stuff that you were just talking about should be made in America. But like, who's going to make it? Would the American population be willing to do that? And B, it will take a very, very long time to build up domestic manufacturing to that level.
Yeah, and the Chinese, remember, have spent years perfecting the art of manufacturing at scale, at speed, and really, really cheaply. And you can't just magic that up overnight. These are kind of production lines that have taken decades to develop, and they might be quite simple products, but the ecosystem around them is deeply complex, and you can't just magic that up out of nowhere. It's interesting, actually, Martha, you talk about your gift shop on the Las Vegas Strip. I would bet a very large amount of money that the gifts that you saw on those shelves in that shop in Las Vegas will have been sold or traded at their very initial phase from the wholesale market that I am currently in. I'm almost sure it is precisely the sort of product that this market specializes in. It is just wholesale. I hesitate to use the word tat, but there's a lot of tat in there, right? You know, really the sort of made in China brand, really any product that's got that made in China label, it's quite likely to have been sold and traded in its initial kind of iteration through that market in Yiwu.
A lot of that tat's made its way to Vegas, I'll tell you.
Did you see the video that was doing the rounds that I think came out of China, where they had
I know what you're going to say already.
Yeah, it was AI, I think, but they'd managed to they'd replaced the very efficient Chinese workforce with an American workforce of rather overweight and very, very slow people looking very miserable, doing a pretty bad job at sewing or putting together toys. It was well, you've got to take your hat off to the Chinese. It was quite funny.
Yeah, and that video has gained a lot of traction on Chinese social media. I've seen it a lot of times.
Are you seeing the impact of any of this already in places like Yiwu?
Absolutely, absolutely. Places like Yiwu are probably on the front line in terms of those impacts. I can't describe just how vast this place is. It is absolutely enormous. The words, the world's biggest wholesale market, just doesn't even touch the sides. You could buy really anything you could think of in this place. And they are essentially saying to me yesterday that a big portion of their business has just dropped off essentially overnight. I mean, we spoke to one gentleman who specializes in basketballs, right? An iconic American product. You know, they would be hitting the shelves of Walmart. He's selling those basketballs at his end for about $4 at the moment. They would eventually be roughly $30 to the American consumer. But overnight, his American sort of importer, his customer, is going to have to pay well over double, you know, potentially $8, $9, $10. And that question, of course, is, will the American customer pick up that extra cost? Probably not. So what will actually happen is that American buyer just won't go to him anymore. And he's already seen his orders drop off by 60%. 60%. Wow. 60% of his whole business. And remember, his American clients were actually only 30% of his business. So that just shows the spread of all this, just the nervousness that other customers have fallen off as well.
But just on that, who is that the man you describe, who's he going to blame for this if he loses his job, if he loses his business? Is he going to turn the blame to his own government ultimately because he believes that they didn't help him?
That's a really fascinating question. And I think that's a question where the cultural differences between the West and China will really show themselves, because actually the Chinese system is pretty good at sort of directing people's rage elsewhere, and they're quite practiced at that. And anti-Americanism is absolutely a thing in China and has been a thing for many, many years. And I think, look, Trump's quite easy to blame, isn't he? So I actually, at the moment, at least, that anger is not directed towards the Chinese system. It's directed towards the Americans. It's directed towards Trump. A narrative about the Americans trying to undermine China, trying to hold it back. That's a narrative that's existed for a long time and has a lot of traction in China.
What's fascinating is that works both ways, because I think you could argue that what Trump has done here is to single out China. He's let all the others off, the rest of the world off. He's singled out China as the bogeyman, as the enemy, as the baddie. And I think plenty in America will enjoy the idea that he's picked a fight with China. So fascinating dynamic there. We've been banging on for way too long, but I was going to be talking today about the last few days I've had on the road in Minnesota and Wisconsin, where I am, but we've had far too much happening, so I'm going to do that tomorrow. So tune in for that. All the people that have been caught up in the crossfire of all this, and actually soybean farmers as well, who send most of their soybeans, or did, to where you are, Helen-Ann, in China. That's tomorrow, or you can see it today as well on the Sky News, on the TV channel, socials and online.
That's all for day 81 of Trump 100. If you want to get in touch or have questions for the team, the email is trump100@sky.uk. Thank you both so much for having me. I've enjoyed it.
No, thank you for joining us from China so early, and please come back again soon. Thanks to you all for listening as well. We'll be back tomorrow for day 82 of Trump 100.
Get into the casino, Martha.
I'm running there now. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.